Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hello, everybody. Episode 3 of my discussion with Bob Ruff.
Yeah, it's horrible. Working in wrongful convictions, people ask me all the time, if cops hate me and because I'm always tearing apart the cases that they build. But it's something that the exact opposite is true. We have tons of people in our audience and the contributors to our work that are law enforcement officers and former law enforcement officers. And, they'll all say the same thing. Nobody hates a bad cop worse than a good cop. I'm not out here exposing and calling out good police work, which I think is most of it. It's the guys that cross the line. It's the bad apples that are destroying lives that we're calling out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And frankly, you can't excuse away somebody that's leading a witness. And, if a lawyer tries to lead a witness like that in a court of law, if the judge doesn't stop it, then the other lawyer usually does. And they're just like, you can't do that. That is just absolutely not allowed. And
yeah. And by the way, Jesse Misskelley did not testify. He was tried separately. They tried Jesse Misskelley. He was convicted. They tried him separately. In my opinion, intentionally, because they thought if they get him convicted and sentenced to life, then they can use that as leverage and offer him a reduced sentence to testify against the other two. And he wouldn't do it. He said, I won't lie on the stand. I'm not going to do it. So he wouldn't testify against him. His confession wasn't, so then his confession wasn't allowed to be used. And there's video footage on Paradise Lost of Fogelman, the prosecutor, saying, and I don't know if that was our case and we don't have it. But then later, part of what the investigative team with the West Memphis documentary found out was when they pulled the jury notes and talked to the jury, is a big reason they were convicted was because someone had fed them that information. It's in the jury notes and the pros and cons that Jesse Misskelley confessed and implicated them, even though they never heard that at trial.
Wow. Wonder if they just heard it in the news or something especially a case that's this high profile, surely it doesn't matter how tightly sequestered the jury is. They've heard it. So,
right.
Yeah. Oh, just, you hear about cases like this and it's just churns your stomach. It's like, we have a fantastic justice system and the chances of somebody being wrongfully convicted are pretty low, but man, when it happens, especially something like this, it is just brutal. So
the sad part is it happens a lot more often than people realize until you get into, they're like the Texas Department of Corrections acknowledges that probably 10% of the inmates in their prison are innocent. 10%. That may not sound like a big number, but that's 15,000 people in the state of Texas that the TDCJ says are probably innocent. And we have a system that it's turned into an assembly line. Very few cases go to trial. Most of them are pled out. They put people in a position all the time where, even innocent people say an innocent person will never plead guilty. Well, that's not true. They can build enough of a case against you and say, look, we're going to take you to trial and we're going to go after a life sentence. And you're like, but I'm innocent. And your lawyer tells you, well, you might be innocent, but if they convince the jury you're going to prison for life, but they're offering you just 10 years if you take a deal. It happens every day.
Oh, well, again, I have a friend that used to live in my neighborhood that was wrongfully accused by a minor of sexually assaulting him. And first of all, he worked in the psychology arena, and so he was immediately fired. And I overheard during the trial, some attorneys talking, and they were like, you know what? It doesn't matter if they didn't have any evidence. The fact that a junior or a juvenile accused him of sexual assault, a female accusing a male of sexual assault, there's no way that's not going to go to trial. And he was looking at 30 years. And the evidence was just so blatantly missing. For example, if two people are rolling around in a I mean, especially from my perspective in the M-Vac system, one of the scenarios was they were rolling around for 3 or 4 hours in a sleeping bag. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't even need the M-Vac to get DNA from that sleeping bag.
Right.
And yet none of her DNA was on that sleeping bag, and they didn't even use the M-Vac. But I'm just like, well, that's because it didn't happen. Yeah. I mean, it's physically impossible that some level of physical evidence isn't going to be there in these kind of scenarios. And I'm like, well, why is this even coming to trial? And again, we revert back to, they're like, well, in today's society, it just demanded it. It's like the prosecuting attorney, he's an elected guy. And if he had said, you know what, there's no evidence, we're not taking this to trial, he would have been crucified. And so instead, they absolutely destroy this guy's life. And it drug on for 3 years. So this guy is out of work. He's almost lost his entire, house and everything, had to rebuild his career, and all over just basically nothing. And to me, that's yes, our justice system is effective, but in the whole plea deal, hanging this life without parole kind of, or whatever the sentence is, that these prosecuting attorneys try to do to get plea deals, I think is just absolutely corrupt.
Yeah, it's a rough system, and for God's sakes, don't be poor. Because the number, I mean, minorities, people of color, and a huge factor is money. I mean, if you get sent into that system and you don't have the money for private attorneys and investigators, you're just screwed. You're just screwed in the system. You might as well just count on going in and taking a plea when you have a public defender who are great. They're amazing, and they do God's work, in my opinion. But their caseload's insane. These public defenders will have 150, 200 cases dumped in their laps. And then you expect them to put the attention that needs to be put into yours. They're just not going to. They're going to read the file right beforehand, talk to the prosecutor, and say, I can get you 2 years. Let's move on.
Yeah. Which, again, what you just said, there are so many things wrong with what you just said that it's, I mean, this isn't Bob Ruff. This is, the reflection on the system. It's like, that is screwed up, and again, reverting back to this scenario of this wrongfully accused friend of mine. Fortunately, he had a house that he could mortgage and family that could chip in some, and was able to survive through this and get a decent lawyer, because otherwise, he was looking at 20 to 30 years over something.
Was he acquitted at trial?
Oh yeah. Jeez. Yeah. I sat through the entire prosecution of it. And I'm like, these prosecutors, and they were junior prosecutors. So obviously the DA had assigned these guys this case. And I imagine these prosecutors are looking at this going, this is just stupid. There is no way we are going to get a conviction here. And so, but they had to go through the whole process. And to me, it's like when you go through that and you think about how many times that happens throughout the judicial system, how many cases like that are sitting there. These guys put in 3 years worth of investigative work. How many resources were applied to this case when there was no case to begin with. And I don't know, to me, it's just like, what, because of political pressure, and this DA didn't want to face an election, knowing, with the people knowing that he had dismissed a case where a juvenile had accused a grown man of sexual assault, and he hadn't taken it to trial, all because of that. they go through 3 years of hell, 3 years of, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars minimum. And it was all for nothing because they had no evidence. They had nothing. And this girl is 16 and she's a known liar. The whole reason she was even remotely in the vicinity of this friend of mine is because her parents couldn't control her. I mean, she was just a pathological liar, and he was trying to help her. And then she ends up accusing him of sexual assault and just turns everything upside down. And I don't know how often scenarios like that or that extreme, but it's probably a lot, like you said, it's probably a lot more than what people think.
Well, the reality is, and I don't know your friend or the case, so I can't speak to that, but I can tell you that if your friend didn't have enough money or resources to get an attorney, he would have got sentenced to 5 years in prison and a plea deal 2 years before that, and would have probably got out in 2.5 years. And if it was a true case, the victims would be pissed because he only got 2.5 years. And if he was truly innocent, then it's horrible that he spent 2.5 years in prison. That's how it works. If you don't have money, they would go to him and say, we're gonna get you for 30 years. Your public defender, who is really part of it, is going to come to you and say, look, I can get you cut down to 5, you're out in 2, or you can risk 30. And they just shovel them through. They probably would just rip off 10 of those in a day. They just get the plea deals done and go.
Oh,
so
yeah.
he's, so if your friend's innocent, he's lucky that he actually had an attorney and was able to fight it for that long, because a lot of people can't.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I sat down with him. Well, not sat down with him, but I was reviewing it and I said, look, I don't know a lot of the details, but I can tell you from a DNA perspective, which I do have some expertise in, from a DNA perspective, if they can't find her DNA in all of these scenarios that she's accusing you of, then there is no way they can prove you, unless they have something that they're not telling you, which they can't really do. But from a DNA perspective solely, I was looking at it, and I was looking at all the evidence and all the scenarios, and I was like, holy crap, no way. Yeah. And again, just from a DNA perspective and knowing the capabilities of the M-Vac system, most people don't understand how much DNA they're depositing in wherever they are. And, again, you're looking at, well, I rolled around with this guy on a sleeping bag for 4 hours. I'm like, yeah, your DNA is going to be there. And they couldn't find it.
When I was at Pure Gold Forensics for the show, which is an M-Vac lab, when we filmed it for the TV show, Susanna Ryan, the analyst there, had me just hold on to a rock for a few seconds and then send it back and then scan it and then sent me back a week or so later, because then she took a buccal sample too. And said, yep, she got my DNA off that rock from just holding it for a few seconds. That little bit, it's amazing what that system you guys have created can do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's technology nowadays. I don't know how much of anybody gets away with crime, because the technology, and this is everything from ballistics to fingerprinting to DNA. It's just, you do not have much of a chance to get away with a crime if the resources are applied to it. So,
right.
Well, hey, let's finish up with West Memphis 3. So where are we with the case right now?
Well, as I mentioned, when we did the docuseries that came out in the end of March of 2020, what I found was, interestingly enough, is kind of where our worlds collide is, as I said, we found that through our audience and the connections out there, oftentimes we can find new information about a case and solve a case just because of the outreach. And so that's kind of what we took a stab at with both the podcast and the TV series. What we found through that is this case has been talked about too much by too many people for too long, and so many memories have been warped. And we determined through that process that there's one thing that's going to solve this case, and one thing only, and that's going to be science and forensics. There's not going to be a new witness because at this point, if a new witness came forward and said, I saw him do it, no one would believe them, or half the people would, half the people wouldn't. There's too many conflicting stories out there. And so that's how we ended up, connecting with you and the M-Vac technology. So the series ended with my call to action to the listeners, because throughout the process of filming, we were constantly trying to contact Scott Ellington, the district attorney, the prosecuting attorney, requesting that he allows us to use M-Vac to test the evidence, specifically the ligatures, which were shoelaces that tied all the boys up. The problem, all this evidence was underwater. But Susanna Ryan at Pure Gold Forensics told us, number one, when you tie a knot, you tend to shed skin cells. And number two, if there's anything that hopefully got protected and didn't get washed away with the water, it could be those knots, because it would be tied up and protected inside there. So we want to use M-Vac to test those knots. And he ghosted us throughout the entire productions, wouldn't answer. So my call to action at the end was for the audience to put the pressure onto Scott Ellington, call him, email, write him, go to his office, blast their social media everywhere you can to get him to test the evidence. And within a week, he was shutting down social media pages, because there were millions of people were just beating this guy up, so to speak, verbally and through the computer. At that point, Damien's attorney, I talked to him. I said, I think now's the time. Try it once you guys reach out to him. So Damien's attorney reaches out to him and says, all we're asking is to test the evidence. He agrees to it. We spend 6 months going back and forth with, what do you want to test? Where are we sending it? What's the FedEx account number for the lab? Ready to go. And then he gets appointed to be a judge, which was going to start in January. So come November, he just ghosted us. Right to the point where the next email was, it's in the mail on the way to the lab, and he just disappears. Figuring, well, I can just wait this out a few months, and then I'll go to my new judgeship, and it's not my problem anymore. He does that. New guy takes over. Keith Cressman takes over as the prosecuting attorney. Lawyers reach out to him. What can we do? And he says, this is last year, about a year ago, winter of 2021. He says, hey man, I'm a truth and justice kind of guy. I just want the truth to be out there. I have no problem testing the evidence. Let's get together on this. Next thing we know, he goes out to the press and does a press release and says the evidence is lost. Or, oftentimes in cases like this, the evidence is lost or destroyed. We don't know where it is. Stops answering the legal team. So the legal team then files a FOIA request saying, we want a list of the evidence and where it's at. Arkansas law says they have 3 days to respond, or maybe it was 10, whatever it was, they didn't respond. Then the police chief comes out to the press and says all the evidence of the West Memphis 3 case was destroyed in a fire 15 years ago. So it's gone. Then the mayor comes out, says the same thing. 15 years ago in a fire, all the evidence was destroyed.
So those guys are just parroting that, right? I mean, they didn't really know.
Yeah, they said basically, go away. There is no evidence. It was destroyed in a fire all these years ago. And the police chief did know, because it was the police. That's where the evidence is stored, is at the police department. So they file requests with them, tell us where the evidence is, or if it was destroyed, when was it destroyed, under whose orders. Again, they break Arkansas law by not responding to the request. Damien then sues the city of West Memphis and the prosecuting attorney for not responding to the requests to a higher court. Meanwhile, Mara Leverett, who wrote the book The Devil's Knot, she filed a request with the fire department, wanting to know what fires had been at the police department over the years. Turns out
I listened to that podcast of yours with that interview with her, and she's brilliant. She's brilliant.
Yeah, she is. It was a tiny fire in a storage shed one time years ago. It was put out with a fire extinguisher. Nothing about any evidence being destroyed. Finally, the higher court orders the city of West Memphis to respond to the request. They finally do, and they give them the evidence log, and there's all the evidence. And then finally, in December this year, or this past December, a couple months ago, the city attorney for West Memphis invited Damien's attorneys into the evidence room at the West Memphis Police Department. Lo and behold, there is every piece of evidence, as he put it, neatly organized and cataloged in the evidence room where it's been the whole time. They were straight up lying about it being gone all that time. Physically saw the ligatures, which is what we want to test. We saw that we confirmed that they are there. They are still tied. They're intact. And they're preserved. So then it's back to the DA or the prosecuting attorney. Okay, now the evidence is here. Why don't you file do this joint motion to test the evidence, since you said you would. And he says, no, you have to file it with the court. So, and where we stand right now is Damien's defense has filed a motion with the court to use the M-Vac extraction method to do DNA testing on the ligatures in evidence, and Cressman now has probably about 10-15 days left to respond. We don't know if he's going to respond and try to fight it, or if he's going to respond and say, fine, I agree, and let's go ahead and test it. So that's where we stand right now.